So about 2 months ago, our fearless leader, Patrick, approached me with this idea for this presentation where, as you know, ChatGPT 4.0 provides you the opportunity to kind of like build your own chatbot, right? And the idea was, can we take a chatbot over the course of 2 months, feed it as much information as we could, and turn it into a PPC expert in that span of time. And I don't know if he picked me for this on purpose, because I've been a pretty open skeptic of this entire technology since it kind of burst on the scene a year and a half ago. And so I don't know if he was trying to push me into this and force me to use it, or if he just wanted a fresh perspective. But that's kind of where we started. And I had all of these ideas. The first thing I started using it for was regression analyses of looking at different KPIs against CPCs and conversions and seeing what the correlation was and seeing how I could utilize ChatGPT in that format and what ChatGPT, particularly your own ChatGPT bot, could learn while doing that. And the biggest takeaway from this is 2 months is not enough time to teach a chatbot how to become a PPC expert. Frankly, I don't know if a year or even a decade at this point would be enough time to do that with the technology at its current state, right? And this makes sense, right? Like the data sets that ChatGPT and these other generative AI platforms are built on are like incomprehensibly massive, and no one person can feed enough information into a ChatGPT bot to like substantially change the way it functions at its core. That doesn't mean it's like useless, this function, and we're gonna go over a little bit of like what it really does. The primary function of this functionality within ChatGPT, from my eyes, is to provide it with a little bit more context, and that's helpful, right? Like, at the end of the day, what you're doing with a ChatGPT prompt is providing the algorithm with context, and the more specific you get with that context, the more useful it's gonna be for you, especially considering like it's always trying to kind of get you off your back. Here's an example of what I mean by provided context and the fact that you're not really changing the algorithm at its core. Later today, you're gonna hear a presentation from Daniel in which he kind of requested my help. And it was kind of going over Google product taxonomy hierarchies, right? And as I mentioned before, I had primarily kind of used this at the beginning as a machine to help me work with regression algorithms. And in doing so, I was utilizing the programming language R, which is like a really popular statistical analysis and statistical packaging programming language. So I asked it a really simple question, which was, do you have access to a comprehensive list of Google product taxonomy hierarchies, right? Pretty simple, straightforward question that should be relatively yes or no. What it fed me was this really long and surface level answer, and then at the bottom here, you can see, hey, do you want to start automating or analyze this categorization process using R programming, right? I never asked it anything close to related to that. It's just trying to use my previous prompts to be like, hey, I know you like to use R a lot. Do you want to use it here? And that brings me to my next point, is that ChatGPT will do anything to get you to shut up and stop asking questions. That's like the primary like kind of function of what ChatGPT is doing. So I guess a little bit of context for me. Prior to being an account manager here at Adventure Media, I was a reporter. And there's a really important maxim that we talk about, you may have heard Ronald Reagan say it a few times, is trust but verify. When it comes to ChatGPT, I'm not even sure I would trust, because the first thing it will do is it'll give you like a really surface level answer. It'll go just deep enough to save as much processing power as possible, to give you an answer that it thinks will satisfy your query so that you stop asking it questions, right? The second thing it will do, if it thinks it needs to do this to get you to stop asking questions, it'll straight up lie to you, right? I know that I'm not the first person to tell you this. I think it's like a pretty common criticism of this technology, is that it's not always correct, right? I think lying is kind of like a loaded term, but at the end of the day, you're asking it a question and it'll give you an answer that's not true, simply to satisfy your query, right? And so we go into this idea, or we go into this technology of ChatGPT, like expecting this, right? You're gonna ask it a question, it'll give you an answer, right? The problem is the first answer you get is usually not satisfactory. And I think we've probably all who have used this technology experienced this. And it kind of forces you to utilize this technology in a completely different way. So the journey on ChatGPT when you're trying to solve a problem looks a lot closer to this, right? You ask it a first query, and then you go through an entire troubleshooting mess, right? Like it'll take you down insane rabbit holes. And then you might get an adequate answer at the end of that, but it's kind of up to you to figure that out, which takes me to my third and final takeaway here is if you cannot determine whether or not ChatGPT is lying to you, you do not know enough information about the topic to be relying on ChatGPT in a professional context, right? I think this is like the really important, if you take anything away from my presentation here, I want you to take away this right here. I think it's really important. And I want to show you an example. Don't bother reading all of this. I just kind of wanted to put it up here just as an example. We work with a client that we created a Looker Studio dashboard for, right? And they were really stoked with it, but there was one problem, right? We had a week-over-week section of different data and different KPIs, right? Phone calls, get directions, things like this, CPCs. The problem is they work on financial weeks from Friday to Saturday. Or I'm sorry, Saturday to Friday, right? But Google provides data Monday to Sunday. And there was no really intuitive way to figure this out within Looker Studio. There's like buttons that you can press that seem like they'll work, but then you test them and they don't work. So I'm like, okay, I have this new chatbot that I'm training to be a PPC expert. Let me start working with it. I spent an hour kind of fighting with this thing, trying to figure out what was going on. And it did give me one piece of information that was really useful, and it's that you can utilize SQL, the database management language SQL, to create custom tabs or custom metrics within Looker Studio. But that was really all I got out of it. It was spitting out code. It didn't work at all, and I had no idea why. So I went to Google, right? I went the old-fashioned way. So that didn't work. So I go to Google, and I find a piece of code on an abandoned Stack Overflow page that has code, and it's this code right here, this up top. And I'm like, okay, this is interesting. Let me plug it into Looker Studio. It doesn't work, but it's a lot closer than what I had previously. So I'm like, okay, let me go to ChatGPT now. Now I have information, right? Like now I have knowledge that I can bring to ChatGPT, and I can help me answer this question. So I plug this in, and I'm like, the first question I ask is, do you know what this does, right? And this is testing ChatGPT. This is like, hey, I know what this does. Do you know what it does? And it gives me this long answer, right? And within 15 minutes, we were able to troubleshoot this, and bada bing, bada boom, we have a beautiful deck here. It works better than previously because these dates are actually dates and they're not just text boxes, so we can actually put them in order. And I think it's a really powerful lesson in the more knowledge that you bring to ChatGPT, the more knowledge it can give you, right? I think we tend to view these things as things that can answer your questions, and I know that this has been a popular theme of a lot of presentations today. But I just really want to pound it home that you need to be the expert whenever you're working with these generative AI platforms. We had a poet up here earlier, right? You can tell ChatGPT, make a beautiful poem. But if you don't know what a beautiful poem looks like, right, you can't even tell if the poem's good or bad. And even if you can tell if it's good or bad, if you don't have the vocabulary or the knowledge to communicate that to ChatGPT, you're still not going to be able to get the most beautiful poem you can get out of ChatGPT. And the same holds true for PPC experts or really any profession. So my conclusion here is text-based generative AI models like ChatGPT-4, they're super exciting, powerful tools, but they're not something that's going to help you do your job very quickly, right? The comparison I keep coming back to is Salesforce, right? We all know that Salesforce is an extraordinarily powerful CRM, right? But you can't just, I'm sure most of you know, you can't just buy Salesforce, install it, and all of a sudden your cost per, your CPAs are just like way better, right? You have to invest, sometimes employees, a ton of money, a ton of resources into Salesforce before you start seeing a return on investment maybe a year later. The same is true for this technology. You have to invest in it in order to get something out of it. And that's both true on the short term and in the long term. And that's all the time I have for this. Thank you guys.